Well, welcome to the wonderful world of research at Charles Darwin University. To help you on your journey, I thought I'd collect the great 8 mistakes that many research students commit, as well as how to prevent these mistakes. The first mistake revolves around the notion of Mycotona coli rhamophilasis. Now, actually, the first mistake does not actually revolve around the notion of Mycotona coli rhamophilasis. Instead, the first mistake revolves around the notion of shunning unfamiliar information, a mistake that you didn't commit because you continued to listen to this recording despite my reference to Mycotona coli rhamophilasis, a word I actually just concocted. Specifically, while skimming the literature, students will occasionally read an article about a theory or technique they don't immediately understand. The theory might seem overwhelming or abstract. The technique might seem complex and cumbersome, and consequently these students may decide to dismiss this theory or reject this technique and simply proceed to the next article. But actually, for several reasons, you should at least occasionally persist with the very theories and techniques that seem the most challenging or overwhelming. Now first, these techniques or theories are seldom as impenetrable as you might first assume. That is, after you skim the information 2 or 3 times, the techniques or theories seem more familiar, and anything that seems familiar is perceived as comprehensible, so your confidence and concentration escalates. Your understanding of these techniques or theories tends to improve more rapidly than anticipated. And second, challenging techniques or theories tend to be the most insightful and informative. That is, these techniques or theories are often dismissed, and therefore these techniques or theories are seldom applied. So when these techniques or theories are applied, your thesis is more likely to be original. Your contribution to the literature and your value to employers is more likely to be significant. Second, despite the benefits of embracing challenging theories or techniques, some students are too ambitious or innovative. They feel their thesis or research is their only opportunity to resolve some grand problem, to contribute to society, to broadcast their insights, and to demonstrate their prowess. Consequently, they develop a very ambitious, innovative, and complex research proposal. But these ambitious, innovative, and complex research proposals seldom evolve into ambitious, innovative, and complex theses. Instead, innovative research proposals tend to evolve into even more innovative excuses for failing to progress. Instead, you should initially propose only a modest extension to previous research. You could simply introduce 3 to 5 important but simple amendments to your favourite study. Or you could attempt to combine your 2 to 4 favourite papers to generate a unique proposal. And during your candidature, we can show you how to amend past research systematically or how to combine previous works without needing to wait abjectly for a burst of inspiration. Now, interestingly, these modest extensions to previous research are often more compelling than ambitious projects. That is, when the extensions to past work are modest, the research is more likely to be sound and valid, and so unforeseen limitations and problems are not as inevitable or sizable. So modest extensions to past work are actually more likely to contribute significantly to both society and to the literature. Even if you follow this advice, your research is unlikely to be infallible. Your arguments will not be flawless. The techniques you use will not be devoid of errors or biases. The third mistake that students often commit is they sometimes overreact to the feedback or criticisms they receive. When they discover the limitations or shortcomings of the methods they plan to use, they might abandon these methods altogether. When their arguments are criticised, they might then shift their position entirely. But the lecturers who criticise your work are not always entirely correct. Lecturers are called lecturers because they often like to lecture students. They like to demonstrate their acumen and uncover the shortcomings of research proposals. Yet they sometimes forget that shortcomings are inevitable. All research is replete with limitations. So you don't need to modify your research in response to every criticism you hear or every limitation you read about. You can merely acknowledge these concerns in the discussion of your thesis. You can discuss how these concerns or limitations could be circumvented in the future. You should therefore conceptualise each criticism as merely an opportunity to write a better discussion. Now, students want supervisors who are remarkably knowledgeable but receptive to your suggestions, supportive but willing to challenge you, approachable but professional, and busy but somehow always available. And if you do meet a supervisor who exhibits these qualities, perhaps you should check the mushrooms that you've been consuming, because really no supervisor exhibits all these qualities. So instead, students are often a bit wary of their supervisors, at least initially. They strive to impress each supervisor, concealing their own doubts and limitations. They agree or pretend to agree wholeheartedly with every comment their supervisors articulate. But actually, when students conceal their doubts and suppress their concerns, they feel they may be rejected. Their anxieties tend to escalate. They don't feel secure enough in these relationships to explore unfamiliar perspectives or to consider novel possibilities. And so their skills tend to be limited and their proposal tends to be quite derivative rather than original. So instead, during the first month or two, you should discuss some of your concerns to at least one of your supervisors, perhaps the supervisor with whom you feel most comfortable. You could refer to some of your worries or limitations. Maybe you're uncomfortable with statistics. Perhaps you don't like writing, and so forth. And furthermore, you should learn to express your doubts about the suggestions this supervisor proposes. You could question this supervisor occasionally, or propose an alternative perspective. So you need to feel that one or more of your supervisors accepts your shortcomings and embraces your feedback. Otherwise, you should seek an additional associate or primary supervisor, someone who exhibits these qualities. Now, one common limitation or concern of students revolves around their writing. That is, some students mistakenly believe their writing ability is inadequate. They don't feel they can express themselves well, except perhaps when they vomit, perhaps. But their writing ability is not inadequate. Writing ability is not immutable like a tattoo. Instead, writing is a skill that everyone can cultivate gradually. Inadequate writers can become good writers, and good writers can become accomplished writers. So to illustrate, you can learn hundreds of simple principles on how to write more precisely, concisely, professionally, and fluently. For example, if you avoid the word it, as in IT, you inadvertently comply with about 10 writing principles. If you learn how to write 6 to 10 types of paragraphs, your work tends to be more cohesive and logical. If you record interesting words that you read every day, you begin to write more fluently. And if English is not your first language, but you read aloud more often, your grammar will improve effortlessly. Regardless of whether your writing is deficient or delightful, every week you should learn and practice additional writing techniques and principles. And this skill will benefit you in almost every role you pursue in the future. Indeed, if you dedicate about 500 hours to improving your writing skills, you'll save several thousands of hours writing your thesis later. Now, if you cultivate your writing skills, you can write your thesis quite swiftly. But many other research activities demand more time than anticipated. That is, people tend to underestimate the duration of the tasks they need to complete, called the planning fallacy. And assuming you're a person, you too will most likely underestimate the duration that many research activities demand. Now, if you predict that a task such as analysing a set of data can be completed within, say, 3 weeks, you'll probably need 4 to 5 weeks. And if you predict that an activity completed within 4 months, you might need 5 to 6 months instead. Because tasks demand more time than anticipated, students are often unable to fulfill their deadlines. They feel rushed and stressed and anxious and overwhelmed. And so to prevent this problem, whenever you set a deadline, such as to analyse the data this month or to write a chapter next month, you should record 2 to 3 obstacles that could impede your progress. Maybe problems with missing data could hamper your data analysis, or maybe family responsibilities could hamper your plan to write a chapter. Now, interestingly, you should not attempt to record more than 3 or 4 obstacles. Students often struggle to identify more than 3 or 4 obstacles, and so as they strive fruitlessly to identify more than 3 or 4 obstacles for each deadline, they unconsciously assume that few obstacles will impede their progress, and so they become unduly confident. They set unrealistic deadlines as a consequence, and hence they often feel overwhelmed and inundated. And second, for every task you plan to complete, include an activity that is useful but not essential. After you analyse data, for example, you might plan to record insights on how to complete this task more efficiently in the future. Or after you write a chapter, you might plan to remove each instance of the word it. But then if you discover you can't complete these tasks on time, you could abandon these inessential activities. Now, one activity that students incorrectly assume is helpful but not essential is networking. That is, some students feel that only extroverted people participate in networking. And also some students feel that networking is inauthentic or unnecessary. Networking is the domain of car salespeople instead of research students. But these assumptions are misguided. So to illustrate, during your candidature, you might email a variety of academics around the world simple questions. You might ask some researchers whether they experience any complications while applying some method you plan to utilise. Or you might ask other researchers whether they're aware of anyone who is extending their previous research. You might inform researchers that you're extending their work and ask them whether they'd be interested in the results. Now, this exercise is not only intended to garner vital insights. Instead, this exercise also helps you identify helpful and responsible contacts who could be, say, examiners or employers in the future. And so networking can help you identify actually sympathetic examiners, ultimately the key success or determinant of completion. Now, the final mistake that students should not worry about is mistakes. That is, embrace mistakes. Embrace activities in which you might fail. Embrace tasks that might be stressful but beneficial. People who choose activities that are moderately stressful tend to actually become more resilient over time later in life. And people who choose activities in which they might fail are more likely to learn and thrive in the future.